Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. Had a little technical uh, issue. We'll be joined by Dave Snell momentarily. Our word of the day is quality. Uh, and here we go. Yeah, everything's working perfect now, Dave. So it means
Okay.
we're live and we're connected. And hopefully we didn't mix too many people up. So with that said, welcome again, Dave. I know you started out with a great definition of quality. If you want to, why don't you repeat it one more time? I know you got it right this time.
Well, I think I had it right the first time, and I'll do my best to get it back. But it was a great word that when you brought it up as the quality is the word of the day, I had to go back and think about it and look up a definition, which comes out to the degree of excellence of something generally measured against other things of similar kind. And it made me think about those things that I use the word quality, and it's usually about people or objects or items of things that I own or want to purchase. And it made me think of this quote I've looked up and found is from Benjamin Franklin: "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." And we need to look at quality when we're buying things. And in this current market where we struggle, we need to get some things of lesser quality because we need to save money. And again, I'm paraphrasing, I'm adding a few things to what I said before, but it's an interesting thought that we have to think about. Do we want quality versus quantity versus cost even in here as we look at things going on in our lives?
Yeah, that is key. And, quality is a matter of viewpoint. So what's high quality to someone may not be the same quality perspective as someone else. One of the keys to quality is to really measure performance and execution. So at the end of the day, just like a craftsman will finish a table or a chair or whatever they're working on, uh, and it's that extra touch of looking for a little bit more polish, a little bit more attractiveness. It's really taking something, and usually they go from a brand to a signature brand.
Yeah.
And usually when you see the signature of the brand, you can identify if it's Four Seasons, you have a certain expectation. If it's a Best Western, your expectation changes. But again, it depends on need, and it depends on experience. Some people are more comfortable in a Best Western than they are a Four Seasons, right? Because they don't need everybody hovering over them and sharing all kinds of different elements. And it's a matter of cost and value.
Yeah.
So, it's not what you pay, it's what you get that
Yep.
determines if you're satisfied. And, if we carry that over into leadership, that's a standard that people hold, that they have expectations of not only their performance, but their group's performance. And usually it's great to measure on the quality of performance. If you look at football teams, and everybody's getting ready again somewhat for the new season, now they're having practice camps and workouts, and that will determine how well people trained, how people got ready, and then how people show up. And I think part of quality is consistency.
Yes.
Right? If you are working with someone who you respect and appreciate their work, quality is a factor. And when it's continuous, you get to be more comfortable and you're more relaxed. When you're starting out with a new workman who you don't know, your imagination can go wild. But if you're dealing with someone who's tried and true and very dependable, that gives you a lot more confidence. So how do you apply quality to leadership, Dave?
Oh, quality to me when it comes to leadership is somebody who has, let me think about how I put this, is someone who has put in the forethought of reasoning of why or how they're going to communicate what it is they want to get done, what it is they want to get done first, and how they follow through. And too often I saw and I see leaders that are reactive instead of proactive in thought. And I will go back to my own career, and it's funny we bring this up just now, is I just saw a video of a guy. It was just a snippet of a podcast of a guy who said that he remembered his first introduction to Stan McChrystal. General McChrystal was a one-star who was the public affairs, the spokesman of the Pentagon, the Joint Staff at the time, post, it was right after OIF began, maybe a year into OIF, not even a year into OIF. And the guy was talking about how he came in to JSOC and said, well, what is it that we are dealing with? Instead of coming in, and this is a quality aspect of, well, I'm the new boss, I'm going to come in and I'm going to drive change the way I see it, no matter what. And that doesn't, and I've always had this struggle with change for change's sake. These new leaders who come in and say, I want to make my mark and I want to change whatever happened before, whether it worked or not, I don't care. It's my mark. I need my resume, my fitness report to reflect my success. Okay, great. Well, McChrystal came in and said, okay, what are we dealing with? Let me get some input from all the different aspects, the perspectives of people who are dealing with different things in the fight. I'm going to mold my thought process, and then I'm going to share it, get some more feedback, and then execute. To me, that's a quality leader who is doing things for the right reason compared to change for change's sake, if you will. So go back to our definition, when measured against other things of similar kind, leaders, Stan McChrystal, quality leader versus a still proactive, but proactive for the wrong reasons, for selfish, egoistic reasoning. McChrystal came in and said, I want to do what's right for right's sake and make sure I have people coming along with me. Whereas the first leader, coming in for themselves, we're going to have fighting. People are going to not understand the mission, the reason for the change. And if they understand it as, well, the guy just wants to be himself and do it for egotistical reasons, well, I'm not going to be with him. General McChrystal came in and brought us all, and his team of teams, what became the team of teams concept, we all wanted to go on the mission with him. I fought to go back. I got denied to go back with him. But I was itching to go back to a fight, which sounds, moronic in my mind now, but almost moronic. But what a great leader, what a quality element that he brought to leadership. And it still stands to this day. In many ways, he's still leading us as a nation in civilian life.
Yeah, so true. And, again, that quality standard that people hold themselves to. They say integrity is something you can do in the dark, right? Because, it's not important that everybody knows it or sees it, but it's important for you to appreciate it. And leadership is just that. It sets the standard and expectation by modeling. You're so right. There's so many leaders who do as they say, not as they do. And, it's hard when you're working in a company and you're working really hard, and the president of the company comes in at 10, leaves at 2, brings their golf bag in with them, and just takes people for granted. And I think that's what people do who lack quality. They give themselves way too much room at someone else's expense. And you get a dissatisfaction element that gets to creep into it. And then that becomes your reputation. So your quality standard follows you wherever you go. And that's why, like online, everybody depends on recommendations and how many stars did they give you and what was your personal experience. So sometimes you can be very successful professionally and just terrible personally for what that exacts on you. So is someone going to be a workaholic? Is someone going to do a lot of pleasing? And it's really hard, especially when you're not ordered to do anything, right? Where it's voluntary. And people naturally either have that work ethic and that quality standard that they've built and developed over their life and with the help of a lot of mentors, and they carry that forward. The definition of leadership I always tend to move to is getting people to do things they wouldn't have or couldn't have done without you. So it's what you instill in others that, again, supports you going forward. And also, there's something to pride. And quality has a lot to do with how proud you are. I mean, I was just at an award ceremony this last week for my 6th grader and 8th grader grandchildren, and they both received these awards. And some of them, well, they were all pretty cool because there was only like 50 kids out of the school, the junior high school or middle school of, quite a few. And, what was interesting is so many kids who won awards were from different nationalities, and it could have been just by chance, but it seems to follow suit that parents who put pride in education, in attendance. I mean, there are kids who never missed a day in 3 years, and I'm sure they had days when they didn't feel 100%. And there were days when they could have flipped a coin, but it was just something they had a standard that they tied themselves to. And the award ceremony is the reward. It's to be recognized. It's to say, hey, they could have done whatever they did. And what was fascinating, quite a few special education kids made it. Some of it was attendance, and actually some was grade point average, and some kids couldn't really verbalize the same way as other kids, and they were in motorized wheelchairs. But you should have seen the smile on their face, when they were recognized. I mean, some were jumping up and down and couldn't believe it, and everybody got excited for them. And you realize that people are people.
Yeah.
And it's not the best, it's the most consistent, and it's the ones who try the hardest. There's so many people who are blessed with attributes and qualities that they never leverage. They just kind of slide through, but that doesn't prepare them when there is no more slide. It actually spoils them, and I know, raising kids is not easy, but it's that whole motto of pay now or pay later. How are you going to invest in your kids, and how are they going to see you as somebody that they fully respect and appreciate? So that goes not only with raising kids, it goes in the military, it goes in private and business situations. So I know we talked about role models in the past, but who can you identify as somebody that was really just thoroughly quality?
Well, I have hesitated to do this more and more as I've gotten older, because I found that through my life, I've leaned on this answer very easily. And I will start with one and go to a couple others first. But first and foremost is my father. We are carbon copies of each other. In a lot of ways, people have called and I've spoken for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And they've been like, am I talking to Dave or Steve? I mean, people have looked, my great aunt looked at me, she hadn't seen me in 20 years over in Liverpool, was in my uniform, and she thought I was my father because she hadn't, the last time she'd seen him was in uniform. So she thought, it was just, we're carbon copies. But I go to my dad, and I go to that because he's such an astute study of people and facts and relating history and personal qualities to what, again, leadership, pulling it out of them to get the best. And I say that too because he did that with me. I cannot read an essay or a book or an article without parsing it, because he beat into me English grammar, facts. Where are you at? Ending it with at, that preposition. Mm-hmm. It goes crazy, and it has been beaten into me that I stopped doing it unless I'm trying to pull his leg a little bit. But I've had a couple of great leaders, and I won't even go to the General McChrystals or Admiral McRavens or Admiral Pivuses. I'll go to lieutenants when I was a junior officer, Chuck Johnson in particular, the Dave Sneeze was a peer of mine. We were both ensigns in the Navy, but the qualities that they brought of relating to the people around them, having humanity with their interactions, and saying, okay, I may be judging you inwardly, but I'm not going to do so outwardly. And in the military, we get into this, we're going to rib the crap out of each other, but we love each other. And I know that no matter how bad things get or how great things are, they're going to bring me back into center and say, put yourself back in the right path of good. And I mean positive or negative, back, just bring me back down to earth, if you will. Those two guys in particular, I count amongst two of my best friends.
Yeah, that is interesting. And, you know, what that brings to mind is early experiences or first experiences. Yeah. Right? So when you first went to school, who was the teacher who made you feel happy about learning?
Karen O'Brock.
Okay.
Fourth grade. Still remember.
And I'm saying that still sticks with you, even though at the time you're probably 9 years old. Yep. And didn't have a lot of insight into worldly situations. And the same thing with your first work experience.
Yep.
Right? There had to be someone you looked at and say, boy, one day I'm going to try and be just like that person. And it could have been just because of superficial things. Boy, that person dresses so well. They drive a beautiful car. They live in a great house. And you get a little bit confused by the awards or rewards of success, and you don't always see what it took. I mean, there's so many people that said it took 20 years for me to be an overnight success.
Yeah.
But no one saw the practice. No one saw the disappointment and failure. And I think to get to quality, you need to be able to move through adversity easily, where you don't let anything stop you. You know, it might pause you, might back you up a little bit. And, you know, learning how to learn is a good direction towards building quality, because, you know, it's reflection. Too many people get into something and they're just a pile driver, you know, and that's the only speed they have is busting through things. And sometimes, you know, you get into a situation, you don't quite have it figured out, and sleeping on it for a night or two. And it's funny how the pieces of the puzzle start to come back to you when you take things more naturally. And I think quality is a natural element of being comfortable in whatever you're doing. So, you know, that what I always say is people hear your music, never your words, is the same thing. And people see you in ways you don't see yourself. And you have to be available to everybody based on how they see things. So it's really a language that's spoken to say, hey, when you're ready, we're ready. And
let me ask you, Don, who was one of the quality leaders in your beginning that got you going, that made you say, okay, this is where I want to go, because it's someone I want to emulate, or it's somebody that has shown me the qualities that I want to emulate through my career? Who was that?
I would probably say my grandmother, you know, because she was, you know, if there was a monument to the unsung grandmother, she would have probably won the award, because she always just was pretty much a housewife, raised kids, took care of a house, took care of the family. And she never really got very much formal education. But because of that, she grew up having to learn herself in a lot of ways. And she was probably the wisest person I ever met. And she was comfortable with herself.
Nice.
You know, I never heard her criticize anybody or put anybody down or compare herself. And, you know, I think just the joy of life and simple things that made a difference. And, you know, being a good person. And you know, back then, reputation meant something as a family, as an individual. So when you went out, you had to represent yourself and your family in a way. I remember when I was just a young kid, 8, 9 years old, and she'd always be brushing my hair. She'd button my last button to the top before I went out to see the neighbors.
Yeah.
And she just instilled in me certain things. And when you're young, you're very impressionable.
Yes.
And when you love somebody and respect somebody, you're more inclined to follow that person.
Yeah.
Right? Because the feelings they give you are the feelings you want to share with others. And, you know, it's also their ability to be there when you need them and be available. And any leader who finds time for you above and beyond, there's so many people, especially in business, that took an interest in me for no interest in themselves, but a pure interest in me.
Mm.
And there's a lot of people I could never repay. And what I found out is they didn't want repayment. They wanted to pass the baton. They wanted to share their knowledge before they left Earth, and were proud of you and would keep in touch with you. And you know, fortunately, over time, that's happened to me with so many people I mentored, and enjoyed seeing them grow and build beyond where we started. And I was always happy when someone says, well, I got a much better opportunity somewhere else. It's like, go for it, you know? And it's kind of like being a high school teacher. You want to keep graduating all your kids, right? You don't want them to repeat the class. And then once in a while you might hear about them, but you think about them, even if you don't actually see them. So this whole discussion kind of builds into a greater arena for people.
Yeah.
And, you know, they say the bigger people problems you can solve, the more money you're going to make.
Yeah, but I think what we've talked about so far is the more important. It's less about money. And I just had this conversation with a friend of mine who, she's single, she's in her 50s, she has no intention of ever marrying and having kids. And a friend of hers was like, why aren't you making more money with this product that you're putting out? She said, well, I'm not about money, I'm about legacy. And we've talked about legacy in the past year. And I approached, I really sat back and I was like, you know, I could go out and make $1 million, but I decided a couple years ago that having a job that worked me 60, 80 hours a week and kept me from my family wasn't what I wanted. And it really brings me back to people are the key, because I have a couple of ladies and guys that I'm mentoring now, and it comes back to you in spades, if you will, because I had a conversation with one of them, one of the ladies on Sunday night. And then on Monday morning, she's posting, hey, please contact Dave Snell because he's so great and he does these wonderful things. If you need anything, it comes back to you. Mm-hmm. The best example I have of that, and I get a little touched and emotional with this one, is I had a second-class petty officer, a mid-grade enlisted person, with me in Iraq, and I had sent him on a couple of missions and up north into places that we normally didn't go, and because I knew he was capable at a higher level of performing, and he could really stand his ground with senior people. Well, that was 2004, early 2005. In 2019, he got married, and I may have shared this story on here before, but it's one that just really hits me at my heartstrings, where I knew a quality person, and I'm bringing it back to, it comes back in spades, if you will, that I went to his wedding. He invited me to his wedding, and I got there, didn't know anybody else there. I'd never met his bride-to-be. I'd never met any of his friends in 14 years. And somebody came up and said, hey, you look kind of lost on your own here. I'm like, yeah, I'm Dave Snell. I'm a friend of JT's. And, oh, are you the guy who came in from Virginia Beach? I'm like, well, how'd you know that? Oh, well, JT's been talking about Dave Snell for years. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. And then I met his mom and I met his sister. And I'm just like, well, wait a minute. What are you talking about me for? I'm the guy who learned more from you. But it was a quality guy that I saw a lot of greatness in. But it came back to me as you made the right choice and you've got these great relationships because you did the right thing. I did the right thing. I had faith in him to do things, and it had an impact. That's why I say it comes back in spades. If we don't worry about the money,
Mm-hmm.
worry about the impact on others, the legacy on others. I will tell you, I didn't cry at the wedding because the bride was beautiful. I didn't cry at the wedding because it was a beautiful moment. I cried after the wedding when his mom came up and said, "Thank you for taking care of my son." His sister said, "Wow, he has talked about you for years." And these friends that were buying me drinks, that I didn't know who they were, but we weren't there for me. We were there for JT and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But they were thanking me for helping him. It comes back in waves of emotional, response if you do the right thing, and that's a quality in and of itself.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and that's why I enjoy our conversation so much. Is it brings me back to something that's very similar. I had a really good uncle. He passed away at 59, which was pretty young, quite a while ago. And, people were coming over the house to pay their respects and condolences and everything else. And his boss, somewhat like a partner, owned a big scrap yard. And my uncle worked for him, and eventually they promoted him and made him a partner. And I had a little store in Ferndale, Michigan, on 9 Mile Road. And every night, my uncle would drive by, and once in a while, he'd honk the horn, and I'd wave to him at the window. And it really wasn't the fastest route because he worked on 8 Mile Road, and 8 Mile Road was a big street, like 8 lanes, and 9 Mile Road was a 2-lane road. So he had to actually go out of his way to drive by that store. Well, that was interesting. And what happened at that opportunity where his boss came to pay his respects, he sat down and he said, "You don't know how proud your Uncle Lou was of you."
Yeah.
And he said, he showed me every article you sent him and everything. And I never knew that because, he just wasn't very expressive in that way. He would never tell you things that he actually did. And after hearing that, it meant so much more to me. And you realize how much impact you might have on people you don't even remember.
Yeah.
Right? It could have been a word, it could have been a gesture, it could have been anything. And they're thinking of you maybe in a conversation like we're having as, hey, that person that day did something with me or for me that changed my direction or my viewpoint. It's a matter of learning, but also appreciating the unknown and the unremembered or the non-remembered.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for quality because how you touch somebody. I mean, there's people spend their whole life with somebody, don't have any respect for them, don't look at them as a positive. And there's people you might have met for an hour that gave you some insight or direction or a referral to somebody that turned everything around. And it's funny how certain events impact other events. And just a funny story, my son came in and talked about his girlfriend. And it was funny. My daughter said, "Well, she sounds like the girl who was on The Water Boy, the girlfriend, from Louisiana,
Yeah. The
And,
criminal.
yeah, and me and my wife she had never seen The Water Boy and didn't understand what the context was. So just because of that, we ended up watching The Water Boy last night and enjoyed it. And it was an older movie, but funny, kind of for adolescent boys, I would say, more like 12 or 13.
Or young men at war. We were laughing at that one, so I have to bring that up.
But it's funny how one thing leads to another that leads to another, and sometimes you forgot what the source was. You find yourself going somewhere, doing something, and you wonder, how did I figure this out? And then it rang a bell, just like commercials do. You'll hear 10 Coca-Cola commercials, and all of a sudden you're picking up a 6-pack of Coke, and you forgot that it's because of this constant reinforcement that put you in that mode of, hey, no different if you buy a Ford today, pretty soon you're seeing all the Fords on the road.
Yeah.
Why? Because you bought one. That's focal point to your mind. And it also demonstrates an opportunity to inspire other people. And that whole thing where stories sell, facts tell, no one wants to know dimensions and specs. They want to know, how'd you get into this and how'd you become so successful? And just like the questions and answers we share, who was it that made a difference in your life? And usually it's a collective, especially if you're dealing with family. You got an aunt who's really cool about this, and you got an uncle who's great about that, and you got a cousin who's a little bit goofy, and collectively you put yourself, it's like a buffet. You can say, well, I'll pick and choose this. In one way, my dad died really early when I was 8, and that was kind of tragic, very tragic actually. But what it opened itself up to was this whole array of uncles who decided to take an interest in me, right? So when there was a Boy Scout meeting, someone showed up. When it was something, and they actually got a lot more attention and care than I might have the other way, but also it would have given me an excuse. Because of this, I'm this, and because of that, I don't have that. And, usually adversity doesn't allow you to be the same anymore. You lose your innocence early, and all of a sudden you either get over it or it gets over you, but once you can get over it, it prepares you for other elements or situations in life that most people who had an easy ride their first 18, 20 years are lost in the real world.
Yes.
And, that's why I decided when I was raising my kids, it didn't have anything to do with what we had. It had everything to do with what they deserved, and because early on, kids, I want this, I want that, I want this. And you'd say, we can't afford it, or that's not worth it. And I said to myself, we can afford it. You don't deserve it. Right? I mean, if you did something that was so worthwhile, I would reward you with that.
Yeah.
And kids learn that you can have anything if you go to work for it. But to ask somebody, you're actually doing them a disservice because you're putting them in a mode that, hey, anytime you want something, ask somebody who can give it to you. And again, you're building on sand instead of rock. And I think that's so important, is leadership and quality makes so much difference when you're in need, right? When you get to choose between a Cadillac or a Lincoln, it's not much of a choice. It's not much of a sacrifice. And there's other things that you just can't repair. And I think being pragmatic about that and understanding it and watching other people get by and get away with things that you can't or you wouldn't do, again, could be taken the wrong way. Again, you can have a pity party and you can think about yourself and why you don't have it and why you need it. But, the tragedy of youth is you don't understand what's in front of you.
Yeah.
Right? You only look at where you are or where you've been, and you think that's what life is, and it's not too exciting, and it's difficult. But some of that is you get conditioned to figure out if it's going to be, it's up to me. If I want something, and especially if you're in a challenged family situation, especially economically, the last thing to do is ask somebody for something that isn't essential.
Right.
Because it's disrespectful. First of all, we don't have it. So why do you even bring that up? And now you make someone feel guilty and the whole collective. But if you go out there and start earning money and buying things for people in the family. I remember my grandmother, who was, again, my rock. It was her birthday, and someone had given me a gift certificate to Doubleday, which was a bookstore chain back then.
Yep.
And, I was a little bit shy and never really bought a present for anybody of any value. And I went out and bought her a cookbook because I knew what a great cook she was. I don't know if she could even read the cookbook, but it was just the gift and the going out and getting it that made it special. And sometimes you get into situations where get around people who don't have much, but they give you whatever they have, right? And it could have been just another ice cream or something special they baked, and it had your name on it, and they recognize you. So I think part of that quality is how you leave people and how you lead people, so what direction? Because all the older people always say, well, you gotta walk the straight line, and you got, it sounds so damn boring when you're a kid, and they seem so old at the time, like, boy, you don't know what you're talking about, and you know and
Yeah.
you get into that. But again, it's experiences, and if everybody looks at themselves as what can you do with what you have, who and start there, you can build. And I think quality is something that gets built over time. You were going to say something, Dave?
Yeah, I was just thinking of the other side of that. I mean, it's the effort that you took, the quality of time that it took, and the effort on your part. But it's also the receiver taking the time to analyze and go, is this beyond their means? Is this something that they went out of their way to make for me, or did they just go buy me a gift certificate from, I'll say Doubleday, but it's for someone who is illiterate. That's not very thoughtful. They didn't really put any quality time and perspective into it. So as a receiver, we have to look and say, well, did they take some quality time to know what it is I want or need or think about my interests? So I have to look at it from the other side of, maybe they're going beyond their means because I mean that much to them, or maybe they can only give me a $10 gift because $12 puts them in debt. I'm making up numbers, but the point is, just because you receive something doesn't mean you have to look at what it is they're giving you and why it's what it is to their level as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense. And it's the little things that mean a lot, especially when it's given with the best intention. Somebody might give you a book that meant a lot to them and they want you to have it now.
Right.
And it's not so much what's in the book, it's like sharing something that had value. Someone has $1 billion and gives you $1 million is not the same as someone has $50 and gives you 25.
Right.
Because it's not, money's still money, but it's like, in relationship to it, well, we have Jason's here, and we've got Rebo or Rebbe. Thank you. Quite inspiring. And it's always good to see you, Jason. I was mentioning to Dave, you're coming back in a couple of weeks, I think the 29th. Look forward to it. And, I think that's one of the reasons for doing this show is you never know who you're going to touch. You never know how you're going to touch them. And, I didn't have any idea where this was going to go when I first started doing live streams 2+ years ago. And, counting just the people I know, there was probably about 40 to 50 shows that came from this.
Yeah.
That introduced people to it, and then they introduced people to it. So, it's that saying is, you may be planting a tree you'll never sit under, but other people will. And paying it forward, setting people up for success, and just people knowing no matter what you look like on the outside, you were no different than them at one point. You weren't a born leader. You weren't guided for success from day one. And there's a lot of luck that's involved, whatever you want to call it, circumstance, positioning, being in the right place at the right time, meeting that one person. You can also think of how many people were around you that maybe if you would have said hello to, could have been an open door to more. And being, bringing the best, and I think that's what quality is so important, is bringing something that people can work with and work from. Too many people get together with people and they share their problems. Well, I'm having an issue here. Well, so what? I'm having an issue too. What are we here for? And it's not to be phony and put a Pollyanna approach to everything, but it's also, I learned something. I saw something. I went to a great restaurant. You might like it.
Yeah.
And, people thinking about you. Dave, I know you love fishing. I got to tell you something that's all about fishing, or whatever it is taking an interest in people is actually leading. And I know quality is the word, but that's usually what you assign to something that just transpired. I had a terrible experience. My car broke down. Some took it to a shop. Boy, were they fast. Boy, was that work good. And it was budget friendly. They could have got me anywhere. And I think that's the key. Oh, I've been in situations where it's a weekend, nobody's around, you need something, and whatever the market will bear is pretty much what you'll pay. And now you feel bad because now you're in a bad situation and now you're getting taken advantage of. And the people who are fair and are thoughtful and considerate, and to your point that you made earlier, which is very valid, too many people put a dollar sign next to something and then decide, was it a good experience? There's situations where there is no dollar sign, involved. It's just a matter of what kind of person were they and how did they always show up, and that's the person you'll always think about later on is the times you want to waver and you go back to, well, what would my dad have done? How would he have handled it? And, whether someone's here or not, what would they think of me now? I feel an obligation for people who sacrificed. I feel an obligation for people that went out of their way when they didn't have to. They could have did more enjoying and less passing on to other people. And those are things that you say, well, if it meant that so much to me, it probably means a lot to other people like me.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't have to understand the intricacies, but do you look at someone's eyes when they're talking to you? Are you listening, really listening to what's being said and how that could make a difference? And little things over time done right compound in a wonderful direction. So what other elements, of workmanship or quality can you think of?
So I can think of post-war, most people thought that products coming out of Asia were junk. And I just got rid of I used to be a name brand Sony. I had to have Sony products because I knew that they were quality in my estimation. They were quality. And I had that TV for 20 years, 19 years. Toyota. I've had this Toyota for 9 years, and I know my father-in-law had Toyota truck for almost 20 years. He didn't have to buy a new one. He said, well, this will be the last car I buy. I want it to be another Toyota. So he bought another Toyota. But if we look at what is it about Toyota or Sony, and I'm making this transition from post-war, mass-produced junk that we saw in America to today, where people are holding on to Sonys and Toyotas and Kias and whatever, mass-produced, but they're still quality, even with the quantity. Well, it's because they took an actual effort. They stepped back and said, okay, if our stuff is junk, what do we have to do to make it better? Well, they took the steps in the process to say, okay, I'm going to improve my process. I'm going to make sure that the standards of quality are there and met every time. I'm going to have a quality assurance program. And it shows that quality is a habit that you have to consistently, and that word comes up week after week after week in these calls with us. If I'm going to do this consistently, quality will become a habit that I consistently pursue, and it becomes second nature. But it's consistently, and it has to be worked at. I can't just expect to write something the first time and it's going to be quality. I don't have to edit it. But the more I practice it, the faster it becomes that I can write out a quality paper with minimal edits. There's always going to be some edit that I typoed or something, but the thought was correct. But it took practice, it took work. It didn't happen just because I wished it or willed it onto a piece of paper or into a machine to come out correctly every time.
Yeah, I read you loud and clear because, again, background makes a big difference. I remember my first car was a 57 Pontiac that the headlights didn't work very well, so night driving wasn't very good, and everything was falling apart. It was a hand-me-down.
Yep.
It was like the third time somebody in the family ended up with that car. And make a long story short, it didn't last long. And I was just starting college at the time. And it I had to take a bus to school, and and sometimes with a transfer. And being without a car, especially when you're 16, that's your freedom. That's your chance to have wheels, and either you become dependent on somebody else who has a car. So when you get your next car, which was a 62 Chevy, which I paid $300 for, and at the time it was only 5 years old. Cars were selling for about $2,500. You could buy one back then. Is I drove that thing until the wheels fell off, and loved the car every day I got into it, right? Because compared to a bus and compared to not having the ability to do things on your own, made you value that. And what's kind of funny is, after we got married and Ann got her car, and, she loved the Saab convertible and everything else. We're in Colorado, and I bought my first Toyota. Coming from Michigan, it was frowned on to buy anything but American. And actually, in like auto factory parking lots, they would have a sign: if you're driving a Toyota, don't park here.
Yeah.
So when I got to Colorado, it was more Western oriented, and I saw these foreign cars I never even recognized, and I bought a Toyota Cressida, and I had that car for 12 years. And it never failed me. Always started, and I could have bought any car. I could have got a car every year if I wanted to, but I was so happy with it. And it was so reliable, and I enjoyed it. And I never drove much, 15 miles to work and back, and that was about it. Why buy another car? And my wife felt the same way, as she loved her car. And it meant something. But again, it's from our background. She was from a working class family in Michigan. Her dad was an auto worker, and they didn't have very much. So we had a meeting of the minds of what was important to us and what had value. And it never was possessions. We bought our first house and lived there for 30 years. And unless my daughter wanted it, we'd probably still be living there. Because it was fine. We didn't have to put more time, effort, or money into something we were already comfortable with. We could put it into family vacations. We could put it into helping other people in the family. And at a certain point, your priorities really dictate the quality standards you have. Because like you said, you can impress people with nice, big, expensive things. But is that who you want to be known for? A show off, a braggart? And I always felt, boy, is that unfortunate to put something in someone's face who can't afford it, wanted it, never could get it, and then you're showing your stuff off.
Yeah.
And usually showing a little bit of humility, being somewhat modest, and putting yourself in their shoes, and you've got to remember who you're talking to all the time. And again, if you want people to leave better, happier, and more successful and stronger, what did you give them to help them with that? I was talking to somebody the other day who kind of hit hard times, and they used to have a lot of money, and a couple wives and a few other things later, they ended up broke at an older age. where they had to actually go to work doing things they never would have done before. And, you know, what I realized is that what they built wasn't to last, you know, and the people who slowly put things together and were modest, didn't need a lot. And because they didn't need a lot, they could do different things that other people who were way behind on debt, way behind on mortgage, you know, they're taking anything that has a dollar sign in front of it, burning bridges all over the place, just really wondering is the means justify the ends?
Right.
And I think that's something that people can learn. And even Warren Buffett said, you know, he's 95 now and actually just retired. He's going to stay chairman. But I mean, 95 years old and still going to work every day, living in the same house he bought 40 years ago, drinking Coca-Colas, you know, and he loves to buy and use whatever products he's invested in. And actually, Coca-Cola is his largest holding. He said that in my early days, it was achievement, it was accomplishment. And now I realize how many people did I share love with and will remember me for that, not for my money, but for me. And hopefully shows like this and conversations like this may open somebody's eyes, because if I would have got a lot of direction or instruction early, it probably would have helped me quite a bit in some ways, but also took away the fun of serendipity, you know, surprises that happen to you because you decided to go the road less traveled, and being comfortable within yourself. You know, no one can take anything away from you that you don't offer. You know, people can influence you, but it's your ability to get back into the middle, you know, just like a gyroscope, put you back on your right path.
Mm-hmm.
And also to tell your story, because you paid for it. You know, you had to go through it. And I wish some people could have shared stories with me that would have made me not go in certain directions or stay in those directions. But there's always hope, you know, there's always tomorrow, even today.
Yeah, I think that even then, even had you been given the stories of other people's experiences, we all have to go through our own experiences just the same. Even with the foresight of negativity from the potential, sometimes we have to learn from our own mistakes, if you will. I laughed and had a snicker when you said 16-year-olds with their cars, because quite frankly, I didn't have a license, much less a car, till I was 20 years old. And my daughter asked my father, said, "Well, how did Dad do that?" And he said, my dad's immediate response was, he didn't need a car because he had all kinds of girls coming to take him to and from school and on dates. So, I didn't need a car. I didn't need a license.
Well, that's a feather in your hat. And Rebbe says, this has touched my life. Today is my daughter's birthday, and for real, I was down financially. Can't even afford for her birthday. Someone I know came by and told me, "I feel like blessing you today." He gave me 1,000 Kenya shillings. The joy I felt was so incredible.
Yeah.
And again, and Rebe says, thank you for your words. And that's a gift that we have shared, not knowing Rebe and not knowing his situation, but it resonated and it made a difference. And that may be the first step towards things that may never have happened without this conversation. And that's what makes it so gratifying, whether it's 2 people or 200 people. It's knowing you did something special that you never knew was going to happen. And I got to thank Rebbe for bringing that up, because we wouldn't have known.
Right.
And I think part of leadership and quality is sharing appreciation, right? You may not share in kind, but, you know, I go back all the time and send thank yous. Thank you so much for taking the time the other day and for sharing that with me. I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate you and it. And that sends back a message like, maybe I'll do it again for someone, right? Cook a meal for somebody and they never tell you how they felt about it, or what do you think about the spaghetti? It's okay. It's good. Well, is that all? Not to make something up, but isn't there anything you could say to make me want to cook another spaghetti dinner for you?
Right.
And it's like leaving a tip that isn't financial. It's just a good word, a gesture, a pat on the back. How many people spend so much and they cheap out at the end for something so little, which is, I appreciate your hospitality, and here's one thing I always know about you, and once you say that, the smile shows up. I didn't know. Thanks for sharing that with me. It's important. And that's what I learned at this conference. It said, don't just thank people. That's nice, but thank them for something. You had a pleasant ride. You enjoyed this. Thank you very much. And that makes a difference. So thank you so much, Rebbe. Hope you have a wonderful birthday with your daughter. And feel free. Thursdays we're here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Glad to have you.
Yeah.
And with that, looks like we've come across almost time. Yeah, we actually are at time because this is our second show after the first show. So that was an experience, and we're still laughing at the end of it.
Yeah, this was a great time, Don, and I appreciate it. As always, Rebbe, happy birthday to your daughter, foremost. And I'm glad this resonated with you. And it looks like karma, comes back to quality people, positive karma in this case. To good people. Good. And my dad used to always tell me good things happen to good people. So be good.
Yeah. You never know what you don't know. And I think passing along can only help. And it also makes you a better giver, not just someone a better taker. So with that, thank you, audience. Thank you, Dave. Look forward to next Thursday, and we'll have another word. Quality sure fit in today. So with that said, go out and have